What do you imagine when you think of Italy during World War II? Humiliating defeats on the battlefield? Mussolini's theatrical public speeches? Mobs of demoralized surrendering soldiers? You've probably seen the memes poking fun at Italy's comically poor performance during World War II. These memes have some validity, though not many people understand why Italy performed so badly during the war. Why was Italian military equipment so shoddy? Why did Italian soldiers surrender so often in such large numbers? In this video, we're going to discuss Italy during World War II and why the Italian military was so ineffective. Italy entered the First World War in 1915 on the side of the Entente. Many Italians felt they had been unjustly undercompensated for the losses they suffered during the war. Italy was one of the weaker participants during World War I, and Italian Chief of Staff Luigi Cadorna is remembered as one of the most incompetent leaders of the war. Once Benito Mussolini came to power, Italy embarked on a number of wars in Africa and Europe. In 1922, Italy began to reconquer Libya, which had been taken from Ottoman Turkey before World War I and mostly lost during the war. The Italians used Eritrean battalions and local levies in their quest to spread its reach along Tripolitania's coastline and penetrate into the Libyan interior. Colonel and later Marshal Rodolfo Graziani made a name for himself commanding these troops. By the end of 1925, Graziani's forces had retaken Tripolitania. In Cyrenaica, Italian forces conducted sweeps with columns coordinated by wireless communications and supported by air assets. These troops were charged with hunting down Senussi rebels led by Omar el-Mukhtar. In July of 1925, Mussolini appointed Emilio de Bono as the colonial governor of Libya. While Graziani went after rebels in the countryside, de Bono executed rebels and approved the use of poison gas on multiple occasions. In 1928, Mussolini replaced de Bono with Pietro Badoglio. Over the ensuing 3 years, Graziani and Badoglio brutally suppressed the Senussi uprising. Rebel leader Omar el-Mukhtar was hanged on September 16, 1931 in front of a crowd of 20,000 Arabs. In January 1932, Badoglio announced that the rebellion was crushed. On October 3, 1935, Italy invaded Abyssinia, now Ethiopia. 110,000 troops invaded Abyssinia. Air power would play a pivotal role in the conflict. The Italian Air Force also made use of poison gas bombs. 10% of the munitions used by Italy's Air Force were gas bombs. Emilio de Bono, now in command of the Italian invasion force, advanced into Abyssinia facing little resistance. De Bono then dug in and refused to move further into the country. Mussolini and de Bono butted heads over the speed of the Italian advance. De Bono protested against continuing the advance, stating that his supply lines were overstretched and his artillery needed time to catch up. Mussolini relieved de Bono of command and he was once again replaced by Badoglio. Mussolini then assumed personal command of the war effort. At 4 p.m. on May 5, 1936, Pietro Badoglio led his soldiers into the Abyssinian capital, Addis Ababa. Units of Eritreans fighting under the Italians had been within sight of the city for 2 days prior, but white Italian troops were given the honor of taking the capital. Roughly 3,000 white soldiers and 1,400 Askaris were killed in total. Slightly less than 8,000 white Italian soldiers and more than 3,000 Askaris were wounded. Fresh off of their victory in Ethiopia, the Italians would aid Francisco Franco's nationalist forces in the Spanish Civil War. Mussolini made the decision to intervene in Spain as a way of countering French and British support for Spain's Republican government. Il Duce also wanted a counterweight to Germany's influence in the country, Germany having also decided to side with Franco. On July 30, 1936, 12 unmarked SM-81 bombers took off from Sardinia, bound for Spanish Morocco. These bombers provided air cover for Franco's forces crossing the straits onto Spain's mainland and attacked Republican ships. During August 1936, Franco's army marched up the western portion of Spain with Italian air support. The first aerial engagement between Italian and Spanish Republican planes took place on August 21st, and by the end of September, the Italian Air Force had its first ace, Adriano Mantelli. Mantelli shot down a dozen Republican planes. Initially, the Italians enjoyed control of the skies. However, Soviet-made fighter planes began arriving in large numbers in November of 1936. As a result of mounting casualties, the Italian Air Force changed its tactics. The subsequent arrival of German Bf-109 fighters after March 1937 buttressed the Italian-German control of the air. In late December 1936, the first Italian ground troops arrived in Cadiz, Spain. By February the following year, the number of troops ballooned to more than 48,000. Mussolini and Franco were constantly at odds with each other over Franco's conduct of the war and the role the Italians would play in it. On March 28, 1939, Franco's men entered Madrid, Spain's capital. Later that evening, Italian soldiers entered Guadalajara in triumph. Nearly 43,000 regular troops and 32,000 black-shirt militiamen were deployed to Spain. Over 3,000 died and nearly 12,000 had been wounded. Italy entered the Second World War on June 10, 1940. Rome was an ally of Nazi Germany, and Mussolini had grand visions of recreating the Roman Empire. However, Italy's war aims were in tatters well before the Western Allies landed in Sicily in 1943. The Italian Navy was hit hard by Allied, mainly British, attacks in 1940 and 41. In 1940, Mussolini attacked Greece from occupied Albania. Italy had invaded Albania the previous year and declared the country an Italian protectorate. By the end of 1940, the Greeks had pushed the Italians back into Albania. It was this failure to pacify Greece which led Hitler to invade Greece in April 1941. In September of 1940, Fascist Italy invaded North Africa. However, a successful British counterattack in December had transformed the situation into a disaster for the Italians. Mussolini's failures in achieving his war aims in North Africa would once again drive the Germans to dispatch troops in support of Italian forces. By the end of 1941, Mussolini had also lost his holdings in East Africa. Italian forces would also fight alongside their German allies on the Eastern Front. When the Allies landed in Sicily in 1943, the king dismissed Mussolini as prime minister. Il Duce's regime collapsed quickly. Italy was then divided into a pro-Nazi fascist regime in the north called the Italian Social Republic and a pro-Allied royalist regime in the south. By September 1943, the Italians suffered 205,000 military casualties and 25,000 civilian casualties. This was slightly over a third of Italy's casualties during World War I. Another 225,000 Italians died from September of 1943 onward, most either non-combatants or prisoners of the Germans. So what were Italy's weaknesses? How did the Italians acquire their reputation? First of all, Italy's industrial capacity was limited and decades behind that of Germany. In the late 1930s, agricultural workers made up around half of Italy's workforce. Less than a third of the Italian workforce was industrial. Italy's total industry potential was by 1938 roughly a fifth of Germany's and slightly over half of Japan's. In Germany, illiteracy was virtually eliminated by 1900. But by 1931, around one-fifth of Italians were still illiterate. Cultural shortcomings were also to blame for Italy's military woes. Author MacGregor Knox writes, "Three principal areas of cultural deficiency stand out. First and most important was the continuing imperviousness of much of Italian society to modernity." He goes on to say, "The chief features of that sovereign immunity were the prevalence of illiteracy, local and family allegiances that far outweighed loyalty to a distant and often only dimly perceived nation, a deep-rooted mistrust of authority, and often fierce resistance, conscious or unconscious, to precision and rational planning. All were qualities that extended far beyond the peasantry." Another element to these cultural shortcomings was the absence of a national military culture and traditions. As part of this, the Italians lacked personnel with the technical expertise to maintain and operate complex military equipment. College students were eligible for deferments until the age of 26, contributing to Italy's shortage of personnel with technical skills. In a similar vein to America during the Vietnam War, university enrollment increased substantially between 1940 and 43. In 1939, Italy had approximately 470,000 motor vehicles, compared to around 2 million for Germany and France and almost 2.5 million for the UK. The general conduct of the war by the Italian leadership would work against the war effort. Italy did not declare general mobilization, unlike in World War I. In the fall of 1940, 600,000 servicemen were actually released from service. The armed forces also refused to call up additional men for military service since they could not sufficiently feed, house, or equip them. The branches of the Italian military were also lacking in coordination with each other and with other sectors of the economy and government. The quality of Italian weapons and weapon systems was notoriously poor. McGregor Knox writes, "What is beyond dispute is that Italy's weapons and weapon systems were the least effective, least numerous, and most overpriced produced by a major combatant in the Second World War. Research and development, as well as quality control, were lacking in Italian factories. Fiat, given a monopoly on Italian tank production, refused to produce superior Czech-designed Skoda tanks or the German Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs. Italian aircraft manufacturers also declined purchasing the rights to build superior Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. Italian production methods were also antiquated and ineffective. Italy went into the Second World War doomed to fail. Incompetent leadership, economic weakness, and cultural deficiencies detrimental to military preparedness led to humiliating defeats on the battlefield. The legacy of Italy's farcical performance during the Second World War will always be low-hanging fruit for memes and the butt of many jokes. What do you guys think? What was the biggest Italian failure during the Second World War? How could Italy's military have been made more effective? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.